600 fighter jets, deliberately destroyed by the country that built them. Not worn out, not obsolete on the day they were retired, physically crushed, shredded, and buried. The Navy spent money to destroy them. That is not a normal thing. To understand why, you have to understand what the F-14 was, and who else wanted its parts. This is not a story about budget cuts. It is a story about a design decision made in 1969 that locked the United States into an impossible position 37 years later. The machine is the whole story. Grumman won the contract for the Navy's new fleet defense fighter in January 1969. The requirement was brutal: intercept Soviet bombers and their cruise missiles before they reached the carrier. Not at close range, at 100 miles. That single requirement, a 100-mile kill, shaped every engineering choice that followed. The weapon chosen to do that job was the AIM-54 Phoenix. At the time, nothing like it existed anywhere. The Phoenix weighed over 1,000 pounds. Its radar seeker was semi-active, then active terminal. It could track 6 targets simultaneously and fire at all 6. No other fighter on Earth carried anything close to that capability in 1974. But the Phoenix needed a radar to match it. That radar was the AWG-9, a system so large and complex it required a second crewman just to operate it. The AWG-9 could track 24 targets at once. In 1974, that was science fiction made metal. To carry all of it, the radar, the missiles, the fuel for the mission, Grumman needed a wing that could fly fast for intercept and slow for carrier approach. Those two requirements are nearly contradictory. Their answer was the variable geometry wing. It could sweep from 20 degrees to 68 degrees in flight, automatically, driven by a system of titanium actuators and a computer that read airspeed and Mach. That wing was Grumman's masterpiece. It was also an engineering nightmare to maintain. The pivot box, the structure that held the wing to the fuselage, was made from a single machine titanium forging. At the time, it was the largest titanium forging ever attempted. Only a handful of facilities in the world could produce it. That detail will matter later. The F-14 first flew in December 1970. On that flight, the hydraulic system failed and the aircraft was lost. Grumman had 18 months to fix it before the Navy's deadline. They fixed it. The production aircraft that followed was, by most measures, the most capable fighter the United States Navy had ever put to sea. And then they sold 80 of them to Iran. That decision, made in 1972 under Nixon, was a geopolitical bet. Iran was America's most important ally in the Persian Gulf. The Shah wanted the best fighter money could buy, and the US wanted the sale. The price was $2 billion. The package included 80 F-14s, 7 F-14 Phoenix missiles, and full technical support. Grumman was going bankrupt. The Iranian sale kept the production line alive. Without Tehran's money, there might not have been enough US Navy F-14s to form a single complete air wing. For 6 years, the Imperial Iranian Air Force trained on the Tomcat alongside American advisors. Then, in February 1979, the Shah fell. Overnight, America's most capable fighter was now in the hands of a government that had just taken American diplomats hostage. The US immediately cut off all military support and spare parts, but the Iranians still had the jets, and jets require parts. The variable geometry wing, that titanium masterpiece, needed constant maintenance. The hydraulic actuators, the pivot bearings, the wing sweep computer. Without Grumman's support, those systems began to fail. Within 2 years of the revolution, most of Iran's Tomcat fleet was grounded. But Iran-Iraq war had just begun, and the Tomcat, even a handful of working ones, could still see Iraqi aircraft coming from 100 miles away. Iran needed parts, desperately, and parts were available, if you knew where to look. What followed was one of the strangest procurement operations in Cold War history. Iran began buying F-14 components through a network of middlemen, front companies, and arms dealers operating across Europe, Asia, and the United States itself. The parts they needed most were specific: the AWG-9 radar components, the TF-30 engine turbine blades, the wing sweep actuator seals, Because the US had sold Iran 714 Phoenix missiles in the 1970s, those seekers and components were also in the pipeline. Active radar seeker heads for the most advanced air-to-air missile America had ever fielded. Some of this was discovered, indictments were filed, dealers were arrested. But enough got through. Iranian Tomcats flew combat missions during the Iran-Iraq War. The aircraft that was built to defend American carriers was now flying intercepts over the Persian Gulf against American allies. The US intelligence community watched every procurement attempt they could track, but they could not track them all. Each F-14 part that made it to Tehran was a small defeat, not a military defeat, an intelligence defeat. Proof that the supply chain for America's most sensitive aircraft was not sealed. For the next 2 decades, this problem simmered. The US retired the F-14A, then upgraded to the F-14B, and eventually the F-14D. Each variant brought new sensors, new engines, new electronics, but the same basic airframe, the same parts catalog. Every upgrade added new parts to the global parts pool, and that pool was not fully controlled. By the 1990s, the Navy knew the F-14's days were numbered. The aircraft was extraordinarily expensive to operate, more flight deck maintenance hours per flight hour than any other carrier aircraft. The TF-30 engine, original to the F-14A, had a turbine stall problem under high angle of attack that killed pilots. It took years to fix properly and was never fully trusted. The F-14D with the F-110 engine solved most of the handling problems, but by then, the F/A-18 Super Hornet was already in service. Cheaper, easier to maintain, good enough. The Navy made its decision. The F-14 would be retired by 2006. The Super Hornet would replace it entirely. That decision was straightforward. What happened next was not. When the Air Force retires an aircraft, it usually sends the airframes to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, the boneyard. Aircraft sit in the desert, preserved by the dry air, available to donate parts to flying examples or sell to museums. That is what happened to the B-52, the F-111, the A-10. Partially, it is the normal ending for a military aircraft. The Navy did not do that with the F-14. Instead, the Navy issued specific destruction orders. Every F-14 airframe was to be demilitarized to the point of being unrecoverable. The parts were to be rendered useless, permanently. The reason was spelled out in classified intelligence assessments. Iran had a known, active procurement network. As long as F-14 parts existed in salvageable form anywhere in the United States, that network would try to acquire them. The AWG-9 radar was the specific concern. Even a partial AWG-9, a single circuit card, a single antenna array component, could help Iran restore a grounded Tomcat to flying status. A flying Iranian Tomcat was not just a threat to regional air power, it was a proof of concept for proliferation. If Iran could fly an AWG-9 equipped aircraft, so might whoever Iran chose to arm next. The Phoenix missile was an equal concern. Its active radar seeker represented early 1970s technology. But that technology, in 2006, was still sensitive enough to classify. The decision, once made, moved fast. From 2006 onward, F-14s arriving at Davis-Monthan were not parked. They went directly into demilitarization. The process was methodical. First, the avionics were removed. Every radar component, every weapon system interface. Those components were either incinerated or destroyed under witness. Then, the airframes themselves. The fuselages were cut in specific places, through the spine, through the wing glove box, to ensure the structural members were severed beyond repair. The titanium wing pivot box, that unique forging, the one that defined the entire aircraft, was cut in half. The metal was then baled and sold as scrap. Some F-14s were preserved. 14 airframes were approved for museum display, but only after going through a documented demilitarization process that removed every sensitive component down to the last connector pin. The number 14 out of nearly 600 airframes tells you something about the priority. In 2007, federal agents arrested Majid Kakavand, a California-based Iranian national, for attempting to smuggle F-14 components to Iran through a network of front companies. he was not the last. Between 2007 and 2014, more than a dozen individuals were charged in the United States and Europe for F-14 parts smuggling operations. The network was patient. It had been operating in one form or another since 1980, 27 years of trying to keep a fleet of jets alive by pulling parts out of the American supply chain. The destruction of the U.S. fleet was, in part, a direct answer to that network. No parts, no aircraft. Simple as that. But there is a layer here that most accounts miss. The destruction of the fleet was not just about Iran, it was about a larger principle the Navy had never had to face before. What do you do when the design specifications of your own aircraft make its parts permanently dangerous? The F-14 was not uniquely dangerous because it was old. It was dangerous because it was so good. The AWG-9's long-range track capability was still world-class in 2006. The Phoenix's seeker still had intelligence value. An aircraft that remains capable long past its service life creates a proliferation liability that grows, not shrinks, with every passing year. The F-14 taught the Pentagon a lesson that now shapes how it designs and acquires aircraft. Export customers get different avionics packages. Key components are designed for controlled retirement. Sensitive manufacturing processes are flagged as demilitarization requirements from day one. The F-35's export controls are partly a direct institutional memory of what happened with the F-14. What did the Navy lose when the last F-14 was retired? More than most people realize. The FA-18E Super Hornet is a fine aircraft, but it does not carry the Phoenix. It does not have the AWG-9's original 100-mile engagement range. The AIM-120D AMRAAM, which replaced the Phoenix, is a remarkable weapon. But the Phoenix's combination of size, speed, and range at altitude was never fully replicated. The Navy quietly acknowledges this. The AIM-260 JATM, currently in development, is in part an attempt to close a gap the F-14's retirement opened. The variable geometry wing is also gone from carrier aviation. No carrier aircraft in U.S. service today uses swing wing geometry. The concept died with the Tomcat. Whether that is a loss or an acceptable trade depends on how you weigh capability against cost and risk. But the capability was real. The machine was extraordinary. The last operational F-14D flight in U.S. service was on the 4th of February 2006. It landed at Naval Air Station Oceana and taxied to a stop for the final time. The pilot climbed down. The aircraft was photographed. And then it began its transit to Arizona, where, unlike every other aircraft in that boneyard, it was not going to wait. The F-14 was killed by its own excellence. The AWG-9 was too good to leave intact, the Phoenix too sensitive to store, the airframe too relevant to preserve in quantity. 600 aircraft, billions of dollars in engineering, 40 years of carrier aviation defined by one machine's shape against the sky, reduced to metal cubes in a desert scrapyard. Not because the Navy failed, because the design succeeded so completely that the only safe ending was destruction. If you want to go deeper on carrier aviation engineering, how these decisions get made, what they cost, and what comes next, there is more on this channel. The next video is already up.